A millionaire noticed his daughter exhibiting strange behaviors after starting at a new school. He decided to secretly place a voice recorder in her backpack. Days later, upon playing the audio files, he was horrified by what his daughter was enduring at school and immediately took action. Arthur Sterling was a man who lived by the numbers. He believed in absolute precision. His penthouse sat atop a towering structure in the heart of the city. It was a space entirely insulated from the commotion of the streets below. Arthur ran his life like a spreadsheet. Everything had to be within control. No deviations, no excess. Clara was the final piece that made his life's blueprint complete. The 8-year-old girl possessed amber eyes identical to those of her late mother. But Clara's gaze didn't sparkle like her mother's. It was still. It resembled a deep, bottomless lake. Arthur had once been proud of his daughter's composure. He believed it was the mark of a future heiress. Father and daughter sat across from each other at a long oak dining table. The space was so quiet that the only sound was the faint clink of silverware against the porcelain plates. Arthur watched his daughter. Clara sat ramrod straight. Her elbows were tucked neatly against her sides in perfect form. She cut her steak into precise uniform squares. Not a crumb fell off the plate. Not a smudge of sauce touched her mouth. "How is the new school, Clara? I've noticed a lot of changes in you since you started at St. Jude's." Arthur broke the silence. He hoped his daughter would talk about friends or a fascinating lesson. Clara paused her fork, looking up at her father. "I'm settling in better every day, Father. Ms. Thorne says surplus emotions only disrupt a good plan." "Surplus emotions? What do you mean?" "Things that do not help us achieve our objectives. I am learning to eliminate them for peak efficiency." Arthur nodded, though a faint bewilderment crossed his mind. He had paid an enormous tuition fee for this school. He believed that iron discipline was the key to success. Clara was becoming a miniature version of himself, a talented, cold-hearted executive. The incident occurred when Clara reached for the salt shaker across the table. Her elbow inadvertently bumped the crystal glass full of cold water. The water tumbled down. It spread across the pristine white tablecloth, soaking quickly into the expensive fabric. Arthur stopped eating. He held his breath. With a father's instinct, he waited for a small cry, a look of dismay or teary eyes. He was ready with comforting words that the blunder was no big deal. But Clara didn't flinch. She didn't look to her father for reassurance. Her face showed no sign of alarm or regret. Her small hands immediately righted the glass. Clara used her napkin to absorb the water with brisk, precise motions. She did it quickly, like an automated machine, programmed to handle technical hiccups. "I apologize. I allowed a variable error to occur in the operation." "Clara, it's just water, sweetheart. You don't need to be so stressed about it. Ms. Thorne teaches that every small mistake leads to a big failure. I must correct it immediately to prevent loss of your time, Father." Arthur felt a chill run down his spine. It wasn't the cold from the spilled water. It was the chill of an 8-year-old's eerie focus. Clara wasn't acting like a person who had made a mistake. She was fixing a system error. The meal continued in a silence even more unsettling than before. Arthur had lost his appetite. He looked at his daughter, a child trying to erase all signs of imperfection. He reached forward, intending to touch Clara's shoulder. He wanted to feel her warmth, wanted to tell her she had the right to spill water, the right to be a clumsy child. Clara abruptly stood up. She stepped back deftly but firmly, evading her father's touch. "The anomaly has been resolved. I have completed dinner on schedule." "Clara, I must now retire to my room to recharge my energy for tomorrow's assessment. Physical contact at this time is not part of my optimization schedule. Good night, Father." Clara turned and walked away. Her footsteps were measured, fading until they disappeared behind the bedroom door. Arthur stood motionless in the expansive dining room, his arms still hung suspended in the air, empty. He looked down at the slightly damp patch on the table. For the first time in his life, Arthur was afraid of the precision he had once revered. He suddenly realized he didn't know what was truly happening behind the closed gates of St. Jude's. Arthur returned to his desk, opened a drawer, and took out a small black box. His eyes rested on Clara's uniform backpack placed on the sofa. An idea sparked violating every ethical boundary he had ever set for himself. Arthur Sterling's arm dropped. He stood motionless before Clara's closed bedroom door. Inside there was no music, no skipping, no chatter with dolls, only a thick silence. Arthur went back to his study. He sat in his chair but didn't open his computer. He spent the entire night looking at a family photograph taken a year ago. In the picture, Clara was laughing heartily, her mouth smeared with chocolate ice cream. It was a wonderful mess he could no longer find. The next morning, Arthur woke up earlier than usual. He stood hidden behind a large pillar in the hall to watch his daughter. Clara was sitting on a leather armchair waiting for her driver. She was wearing the immaculately pressed St. Jude's uniform. Her white socks were wrinkle-free. Her backpack sat neatly on her lap. Arthur narrowed his eyes. He noticed Clara's right index finger moving. She was continuously drawing invisible circles in the palm of her left hand. The motion was repetitive and rhythmic. Arthur stepped out of his hiding place. He tried to make his footsteps sound natural. "Good morning, Clara. I think we should have a different plan for the weekend today." Clara stopped her hand instantly. She looked up, her face quickly reverting to her usual calm state. "Good morning, Father. My weekend itinerary was set up last night." Arthur sat in the chair opposite her. He tried to keep his voice as gentle as possible. "Let's put that schedule aside. This Saturday I'll take you to the amusement park. We'll ride the roller coaster and eat cotton candy. Remember last time you insisted on a third ride?" He waited. He hoped to see a sparkle in her eyes. He hoped she would jump up and hug him, but Clara just shook her head slightly. Her hands were placed together again, her index finger twitching, wanting to draw circles. "I appreciate your suggestion, Father, but a trip to the amusement park is an unnecessary resource expenditure at this time." Arthur was stunned. "Resource expenditure? Are you talking about cotton candy and roller coasters like they're a business venture?" "Yes, that time should be dedicated to preparing for the emotional management assessment on Monday. Ms. Thorne says excessive stimulus from thrill rides will disturb my equilibrium. I need to maintain stability for optimal performance." "Clara, you're only 8 years old. You don't need to manage anything. Your balance is about having fun and being a child. You always said that results are the most important thing. I am following the exact way you run your company, Father. Ms. Thorne says I have a natural aptitude for controlling distracting variables. Temporary joy is a type of distracting variable." Arthur felt his heart clench. He looked at his daughter, but he felt as if he were facing a vice president of the board reporting sales figures. Words like distracting variables, management, and equilibrium coming from Clara's small mouth sounded so harsh. "Who taught you those words?" "Your teacher. All the teachers at St. Jude's say so, Father. They are helping me build a lean operating system for my brain. You chose this school because it's the best, didn't you?" Arthur didn't know how to answer. It was true he had chosen St. Jude's. He had chosen it for its reputation, its discipline, and because he wanted Clara to have a solid future. But he never wanted her to turn into a dry, automated machine. He recalled 6 months ago, Clara still cried when she got a poor grade in drawing. Now she viewed everything with the detachment of a spreadsheet. The driver honked outside. Clara stood up, adjusting her backpack strap. "The car is here. I don't want to delay the driver's schedule. Have a productive workday, Father." She walked away decisively. Clara didn't turn back to say goodbye again. She got into the car like a diligent employee entering the office. Arthur watched the car disappear behind the iron gate. He realized he'd been too preoccupied with profit numbers to check what his daughter was actually learning. He returned to the living room intending to grab his car keys and drive to St. Jude's himself, but his eyes stopped at the coffee table. A small notebook lay alone on the leather surface. It was Clara's personal planner. She must have forgotten it in her rush to leave. Arthur picked up the notebook. It was heavy for its size. The cover was made of jet black leather without decoration. He flipped open the first page. He hoped to see drawings of flowers or names of classmates, but the pristine white page only held a single sentence written in the center. Clara's handwriting was meticulous, every line straight and sharp. Rule number 1, emotion is a variable error to be eliminated. Arthur read the line over and over. A dreadful sensation took over his mind. This wasn't education. This was reprogramming. He turned the page. There were bar charts tracking Clara's control level day by day. Days with a smile were marked red with the note, exceeded control threshold. Silent days were marked green, standard achieved. The more he read, the more Arthur's hands trembled. He saw a small note in the margin, meeting with Ms. Thorne at 1400 for memory purging. Arthur slammed the notebook shut. The dry sound of the covers hitting each other echoed. His eyes hardened, the usual detachment from the stock market disappearing, replaced by an erupting fury. He reached for the phone on the table, intending to immediately call the headmistress of St. Jude's to unleash his anger. But his finger paused on the touchscreen. He understood that if he called now, they would find a way to obscure the truth. Those who turned children into machines would know how to deal with enraged parents. They would call it advanced pedagogy, or a misunderstanding of terminology. Arthur Sterling put the phone down. He took a deep breath to regain the composure of a seasoned investor. He needed evidence. He needed to know exactly what Ms. Thorne did during those purging sessions. He looked at the notebook, then at the small black box in the drawer he had opened last night. A plan formed in his mind. It was not precise, not businesslike, and certainly not legal by school rules. But it was the only way for him to reclaim the daughter who once knew how to cry and laugh. Arthur took Clara's notebook and hurried towards the garage. He wouldn't be going to the office today. He had a more crucial mission to infiltrate the system he had unwittingly thrown his child into. He started the car, the engine's powerful sound echoing. Arthur looked in the rearview mirror, his face a picture of steel resolve. He vowed that no rule had the right to turn his daughter into a variable error to be eliminated. The car sped away, heading toward St. Jude's School, hidden behind antique red brick walls. In Arthur's suit pocket, the miniature recording device was ready. He was about to enter a high-stakes game where his emotion, not his wealth, was his strongest weapon. But Arthur didn't know that at St. Jude's, Ms. Thorne was standing at her office window, looking down at the schoolyard and smiling as she watched Clara step out of the car. She held a new report on it. Was Arthur Sterling's name, with the note, "Subject requires indirect monitoring." Arthur Sterling's car did not head toward the financial district as usual, but towards the suburb where St. Jude's was located. After seeing the line, "Rule number 1, emotion is a variable error to be eliminated," in Clara's notebook, he knew he couldn't act openly. He needed undeniable proof. That night, after making sure Clara was fast asleep, Arthur stepped into his study. He opened his safe not for important documents, but for a small black box. Inside was a professional voice recorder, thin and light. He often used it in high-risk business meetings. Arthur quietly entered his daughter's room. Clara was lying in bed, sleeping in a rigid posture, not curled up or clutching a pillow. He took the black leather uniform backpack from St. Jude's. With the hands that had manipulated multi-million-dollar contracts, he meticulously made a small incision in the lining of the secondary pocket. He slipped the recorder inside, secured it with a special adhesive patch, and then stitched the cut with a fine black thread. The entire process took place in the dark, precise, and silent. Arthur stood up, looking down at Clara. He felt like an intruder, a thief trying to steal a secret. But he told himself that the fear of his daughter being turned into a machine was greater than any feeling of guilt. He left his daughter's room. He didn't know what he would hear, but he knew this pervasive unease wouldn't release him until he had the truth. The next morning, Arthur drove Clara to school. He drove his large SUV himself instead of having his chauffeur do it. He wanted to spend more time observing his daughter. "Clara, can we talk about fun things today?" Arthur asked. He tried to create a sense of ease away out of the suffocating atmosphere they had maintained. Clara sat in the passenger seat, clutching the backpack that contained her father's secret. "Fun. What do you consider fun?" "The things you used to enjoy. For example, those beach trips with your mother. Do you remember?" "I remember," Clara replied, her voice flat without a hint of nostalgia. "Mother enjoyed things that had no monetary value. But Miss Thorne says we shouldn't let non-profitable memories take up space in our storage." Arthur took a deep breath. His daughter's words were like cold knives. "Clara, love is not an investment, sweetheart." "But you always taught me that everything is an investment, father. both time and mind. Arthur realized he was at a dead end. His daughter's words mirrored the very philosophy of life he had built. He was forced to change tactics. He remained silent. He looked in the rearview mirror, seeing Clara's right hand begin to draw those invisible circles on her left palm again. Her amber eyes stared straight ahead, fixed on an undefined point in the distance. The car reached the vast grounds of St. Jude's. Unlike other bustling schools, the gate was eerily quiet. Luxury cars pulled up, students stepped out and went straight inside in neat rows. There was no shouting, no affectionate goodbyes. Everything was disturbingly orderly. Arthur pulled the car to the curb. Clara opened the door, slinging the planted backpack onto her shoulder. "I have a private consultation today. I will be a little late coming home," Clara said automatically. "Private consultation with whom?" "With the emotional guidance counselor, Ms. Evelyn Thorne. She is the one helping me achieve absolute equilibrium." Arthur clenched the steering wheel. Evelyn Thorne. That name must belong to the person behind the rules that had transformed his daughter. Clara did not turn back to greet her father. She walked straight, her back straight and her shoulders not drooping. Arthur watched her retreating figure. She looked like a tin soldier on a mission, not a child. Right at the school gate, Arthur saw a woman standing there. She wore a pale cream suit, her hair neatly tied in a bun, her expression severe, and her eyes sharp. It was Evelyn Thorne. As Clara walked past, Thorne suddenly stepped forward. She didn't offer a greeting. She merely placed her hand on Clara's shoulder, holding it for a brief moment. Arthur saw his daughter's shoulder give a faint slight tremble, a momentary instinctual reaction, and then immediately stiffen, standing perfectly still. Thorne's action wasn't a gesture of comfort. It was more like pressing the restart button on a machine. Arthur felt the blood rush to his head. His instinct told him that the touch concealed a menacing message. He clenched the steering wheel, his fingers trembling, but decisively reaching for his phone. He pressed a button. The screen displayed the simple message, "Recording in progress." Arthur's car remained stationary. He couldn't leave. He knew Clara was carrying a dangerous secret. He couldn't fight this system with money or lawyers. He could only listen. He watched Thorne and Clara walk into the antique building together. He was no longer the powerful millionaire. Now he was just a desperate father, placing all his hope in a tiny voice recorder. Arthur placed the phone on the seat next to him. He didn't take his eyes off the closed door. The silence in the car became heavy. He had to wait. Wait for the truth. Wait for the sound that could tear through the perfect facade his daughter was trying to maintain. The recording device has begun running. What terrifying truth awaits Arthur behind the closed doors of St. Jude's? Join us as we follow the next developments. 3 days passed in extreme tension. Arthur Sterling drove Clara to school and picked her up as usual. He didn't question Clara much. He was afraid a wrong question would ruin the entire plan. On the third night after Clara had fallen into a dreamless sleep, Arthur crept into her room. He worked by the light of a small flashlight. The operation, slitting the fabric, retrieving the device, and stitching it back, took only a few minutes, but cold sweat soaked his shirt. He held the recorder in his hand. It was warm. A whole day of voices and sounds were contained in this small device. Arthur returned to his study. This was the command center of his financial empire. He put on headphones, facing the cold light of his computer screen. He began to listen to the data. Initially, everything was fairly normal. The sound of chairs scraping books being flipped. He fast-forwarded through math class where the teacher's voice droned on about formulas. There was sporadic laughter from a few children during the break. But then the sound abruptly changed. Arthur checked the time label afternoon, the time slot called the still hour. The sound on the tape was not soft music or a relaxing story. It was a suppressive silence. Arthur felt as if he were listening to a room where all the air had been sucked out. No coughing, no heavy breathing. He could feel the suffocating tension through the headphones. This stillness was not peace. It was ultimate control. Then footsteps appeared. Regular slow steps on the wooden floor. It was Evelyn Thorne. "Today we will continue our lesson on personal human resource management," her voice stated. It wasn't a teaching voice. It was a hypnotic, deep and sweet tone. "You must understand that your mind is not a garden. It is a balance sheet." Arthur sat up straight. He was startled by the link between psychology and finance. Thorn continued, her footsteps circling the classroom. Joy, excitement, friendship. These are short-term assets. They easily depreciate, easily stolen. While sadness, anger, weakness, these are bad debts that must be liquidated immediately. Arthur felt his throat go dry. He realized Thorn was using the language he had used to build his career, but twisting it into a weapon to attack children. "What is Thorn doing?" Arthur muttered to himself. "You were born into families holding great power. Your parents have invested heavily in you. You are not children. You are investment projects." Thorn's voice lowered like a mysterious whisper. "The only way to repay interest to your parents is absolute obedience. Any emotional demand, any cry is an act of emotional embezzlement." Arthur gripped the computer mouse. His hand was numb. He understood why Clara had changed. She wasn't just learning, she was being programmed. She was being taught that her humanity was a variable error that needed to be eliminated to become a perfect product. The tape recorded Thorn stopping. Through the faint rustle of fabric, Arthur guessed she was standing very close to a student. "We will check Peter. Last week you cried when your mother didn't buy you a new robot. What did you learn?" A boy's voice sounded trembling and full of fear. "Emotion is bad debt. I liquidated that emotion." "Good. And how about you, Clara?" Arthur heard the sound of fabric rubbing against the desk. Ms. Thorn was standing right next to his daughter. "You were drawing circles on your palm this morning," Thorn said, her voice not accusatory, just cold. "What were you thinking about?" A moment of silence. The silence lasted so long that Arthur felt his chest compress. I was thinking about my mother." Clara's voice was so small, it was almost a whimper. "Your mother is an obsolete variable." "Clara," Thorn whispered into the mic, her voice becoming extremely clear like a snake slithering in the grass. "Her value is 0 on your balance sheet. If you continue to allow those garbage memories to occupy your storage, you will become a system error. You don't want your father to incur a loss because of you, do you?" Arthur felt his head spinning. He could feel Clara's pain and fear through that suppressed voice. He couldn't take it anymore. "We will perform the elimination exercise," Thorn announced. "Stand up, Clara. We will do a very simple thing." Arthur heard Thorn tap her finger lightly on Clara's desk. A dry, commanding sound. She asked Clara to stand up. Arthur held his breath. He heard the chair being pushed back. Clara had stood up. "Repeat after me word for word. This is how you protect your father's investment and safeguard your position." Before Thorn took a breath, her voice like reciting a mantra. "The past is an unprofitable burden." Arthur strained to listen. He waited for the next sound from his daughter. He knew this response would determine his every action. Arthur clenched his hand on the desk. He couldn't let this truth sink into darkness. He knew if he called the school, Thorn would deny everything. He needed irrefutable evidence. Arthur decided not to stop the tape. He needed to hear Clara's reaction. He needed to hear how much his daughter had been altered. He sat motionless, his eyes glued to the computer screen, waiting for the phrase that would either destroy or save everything. "The past is an unprofitable burden," he heard Thorn say. Arthur focused all his attention on the headphones, waiting for the next sound from his daughter. Arthur Sterling pressed the headphones tightly against his head. He dared not breathe heavily. He clearly heard the wooden chair being pushed back. Clara had stood up. The still hour was not a relaxation session. It was a psychological interrogation. "We will start over," Evelyn Thorn's voice rang out, still sweet, but now with an underlying menace. "This morning during the break, I observed you secretly looking at an unauthorized item in your desk. Do you know what that was, Clara?" Arthur frowned. He didn't know Clara had brought anything to school besides books. Clara's voice came out tiny and trembling, completely unlike her cold demeanor at home. It was a photo of my mother." Thorn took a long breath as if inhaling disappointment. "I've already instructed you on this. Memories of the departed are data garbage. Nostalgia is a system error that slows down your maturation process. You are polluting your own operating system." Thorn did not confiscate the photo with force. She used words like a scalpel, slowly operating on Clara's tender soul. Love does not generate profit, Clara. Love only generates weakness. Your mother is a prime example of a failure in emotional management. You don't want to follow in her footsteps, do you? I don't. Good. Now, tell the class the new definition of maternal love so we can all remember this lesson. Repeat after me, Clara. The past is an unprofitable burden. Silence. Arthur could hear his own heart pounding in his chest. He waited. He hoped Clara would fight back, would scream that Thorn was wrong. Come on, Clara. Don't keep the class waiting because of your delay. Thorn's footsteps approached closer. The invisible pressure was building. Arthur could sense it, even though he was only listening through an electronic device. Repeat it, or you will have to stay here for extra practice in mind purging. Still silence. Arthur felt a glimmer of hope. Perhaps his daughter was still strong enough to resist this reprogramming. But then Clara's voice returned. This time it wasn't trembling. It was flat, devoid of life. It sounded exactly like an automated answering machine without a hint of emotion. The past is an unprofitable burden. Emotion is a depreciation cost. She recited the mantra fluently. The clear voice of an 8-year-old was uttering these cruel and detached words. Very good, Thorn said, her voice satisfied. Now take that photo out yourself and put it in the waste bin in the corner of the classroom. Prove to me that you are ready to become a future manager. Arthur heard the desk drawer being pulled open, then Clara's small footsteps walking toward the corner of the room. He heard a very soft clink. It was the sound of his wife's photo being thrown into the trash. At that moment, Arthur ripped the headphones off and hurled them onto the desk. Slam! The headphones struck the oak desk, making a dry, shattering sound. It echoed throughout the large penthouse. Arthur shot to his feet, his chest heaving violently. A rage he had never experienced erupted within him. But it wasn't just anger at Thorn, it was anger at himself. The pain didn't come from pity for his daughter. It came from ultimate regret. He realized that his own indifference, his busyness, and his expectation of stability had created a perfect void for people like Thorn to step in and strip Clara of her humanity. He had paid for someone to turn his daughter into an emotionless monster. Just then, a ping sounded from the computer. The screen displayed an automated email notification sent from the St. Jude system. The message felt like a bitter sarcasm slapped in the millionaire's face. Weekly progress report, student Clara Sterling achieves 100% emotional stability index. Arthur stared at the line. 100% emotional stability. That's what they called apathy. That's how they measured the success of the reprogramming. Arthur did not collapse. He took a deep breath. The chaos in his mind was rapidly reorganized. He was no longer a grieving father. He had shifted into the operational mode. He excelled at an executive handling a high-level crisis. He knew that yelling or legal action would be futile at this moment. He was confronting a system built to withstand emotional responses. He needed to act precisely, unexpectedly, and effectively. He didn't wait until the weekend. He didn't call ahead. Arthur looked at the clock. It was midnight. He walked toward his wardrobe, removing his silk pajamas and replacing them with his sharpest suit. He tied his tie with a decisive gesture, every movement strong and resolute. He looked as if he were preparing to enter the most crucial acquisition of his life. He sat down on the living room sofa, staring out the window where the city of Seattle was asleep. But he was not sleeping. He was waiting. He was waiting for the first ray of morning sun to begin the asset retrieval of his most valuable possession. As the first ray of Seattle sunlight pierced the thick glass of the penthouse, Arthur Sterling rose. He hadn't slept for a second. He was in his sharp suit, but his face held a tension no business partner had ever witnessed. He drove not his flashy sports car, but his safest SUV, speeding through the still empty city streets. He arrived at St. Jude's much earlier than dismissal time. His luxury car did not park in the parent lot. It stopped abruptly right in front of the main gate, blocking the entrance and exit. It was his first act of challenging the rules, a silent statement that he was not here to comply. Arthur stepped into the main lobby. The receptionist sprang to her feet, a look of surprise on her face. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. Do you have an appointment today?" A security guard approached, his face stern. "Sir, you cannot enter without authorization." Arthur didn't stop or raise his voice. He merely held up his right hand, signaling silence. His demeanor was not one of anger, but of the absolute authority of a man who controls destiny. His eyes were icy. The receptionist and the guard instinctively backed away. They were used to bowing before people like him, and today his aura was exponentially more terrifying. He walked down the corridor leading to Clara's classroom. The silence was so profound that his leather shoes echoed on the marble floor, a dry and resolute sound. Through the glass windows of the other classrooms, he saw hundreds of children sitting straight eyes on the board. Not one turned their head to look at the stranger in the hallway. They resembled wax statues more than human beings. He stopped in front of Clara's classroom door. He didn't knock. He pushed it open hard. The heavy oak door swung open. All attention in the class shifted towards him. Evelyn Thorne was standing at the podium holding a wooden ruler. The entire class went silent. Clara was sitting at the front desk. Her hand was still unconsciously drawing circles on her palm. When she saw her father appear suddenly, her amber eyes widened. A flash of panic appeared, but her body dared not move. Thorne was the first to regain her composure. She smiled a perfect social smile, but her eyes did not. They shone with a threat. "Good morning, Mr. Sterling. What a surprise to see you here. We are currently in our behavior optimization hour. Your presence is a distracting variable." She turned to look at Clara. The gaze was not encouragement. It was a silent command. "Reject your father. Prove that your programming is successful." "Clara," Thorne said, her voice still soft, "your father has arrived without notice. Do you understand how this will affect the entire class schedule?" Arthur ignored Thorne. He walked straight to Clara's desk, not sparing a glance at the woman standing at the podium. He knelt on one knee, bringing his eye level with his daughter's. He looked deep into the eyes that were trying to hide fear. "Clara, pack up. We are going home." Clara looked at her father, then quickly glanced at her teacher. The fear of breaking procedure was evident on her innocent face. Her small hands clung to the edge of the desk until her knuckles turned white. But father," Clara stammered. "The lesson is not over yet. I cannot leave without permission." "You can," Arthur said, his voice firm. "I am giving you permission right now." Thorne stepped down from the podium, her heels clicking on the floor. "Mr. Sterling, I believe you are putting unnecessary pressure on the child. Here, we teach children discipline and respect for rules. Your action is disrupting everything we have built." Arthur didn't wait for his daughter to decide. He knew Clara was stuck between two commands. He gently pried her fingers one by one from the edge of the desk. He took the backpack containing the listening device, the silent evidence of Thorne's transgression, and firmly grasped Clara's small hand. Her hand was cold and trembling. He stood up, pulling her toward the door. Thorne stepped forward, intending to block their path. "You cannot take her like this. This is unacceptable conduct." Arthur stopped. He turned to face Thorne. For the first time, he looked straight into the eyes of the woman who had tried to turn his daughter into a machine. His voice was deep and cold, every word carrying the weight of a warning. "Step aside, before I deem you a bad debt that needs to be liquidated immediately." Thorne froze. She was accustomed to wealthy parents blindly entrusting their children to her. She had never faced such a direct and powerful confrontation. She instinctively took a step back. Arthur pulled Clara out of the classroom. They left behind Thorne's astonishment and the deadly silence of the remaining children. Not one child dared to turn their head to watch them go. They remained sitting straight, eyes fixed forward. All the way to the car, Clara kept her head down. Her steps were unsteady, unable to keep up with her father's long strides. She hadn't adjusted to this sudden freedom. It was too chaotic. It wasn't in the schedule. When the heavy car door closed, isolating them from the outside world, Clara huddled in the passenger seat. She tightly clutched her backpack as if it were her only lifeline. Arthur started the car. He didn't say anything. He knew the child needed time. But then Clara looked up at him with watery eyes. Her trembling voice articulated the most haunting question she had been programmed with over the past 6 months. "Father, I left the class without command. I haven't completed today's quota. Will you incur a heavy loss because of me?" Arthur was stunned. His hand on the gear shift trembled. He realized that taking her out of this school was the easiest step. The real fight was to take the school out of her head. He did not start the car and drive back to the penthouse. That place was too cold, too full of rules. He needed a different location. Arthur typed a new address into the car's GPS. It was a small wooden cabin by the sea where he and his wife had taken Clara when she was a baby. A place with no schedules, no quotas, and no depreciation costs. The car began to move, leaving St. Jude's behind. But Arthur knew that the journey to rescue his daughter had only just truly begun. Taking his daughter out of the school was just the beginning, but getting the school out of her head was the real fight. Could a father's love triumph over the cruel programming? The answer lies in the healing journey ahead. Arthur Sterling did not answer Clara's question. He simply placed his hand silently on her shoulder. He drove all night, moving away from the bustling city of Seattle. When dawn broke, the SUV stopped in front of an old, isolated wooden cabin by the sea. There were no servants, no automated systems, only the sound of the wind howling and the salty smell of the ocean. Clara stepped into the house. She stood rooted in the dusty living room. Her amber eyes scanned the room, searching for something familiar. She looked for a clock. She looked for a schedule board. But Arthur had removed everything beforehand. In this house, time was not measured in numbers. "Father?" Clara asked, her voice starting to tremble. "What time is it now? I need to know today's itinerary." "There is no itinerary, Clara. Today we will do absolutely nothing." The absence of command plunged Clara into a state of quiet panic. Her limbs trembled, her breath was rapid, but she dared not make a sound. She had been taught that showing fear was a failure. She stood there motionless as a small statue, trying to reclaim the control that had been stripped from her. Arthur went into the kitchen. He wasn't a good cook. He awkwardly boiled spaghetti and heated a jar of store-bought tomato sauce. When he served it, he deliberately spilled a streak of red sauce onto the rough, uncovered wooden table. Clara jumped. Her reflex was as quick as a machine. She immediately ran to find paper towels. She frantically wiped the sauce streak, muttering, "Variable error. Must correct the variable error." Arthur gently held her hand back. Clara's small hand was rigid and cold. "Stop it, Clara." He dipped his index finger into the remaining sauce streak, then smeared it onto his expensive white shirt. The red mark stood out clearly against the white fabric. "Look," he said. "Here cleanliness is against the rules. Messiness is what's allowed." Clara stared at the sauce streak on her father's shirt, her eyes wide. Her logic was being overturned. The world that had just been built for her over the past 6 months was beginning to crack. Why could failure bring a smile? Night fell, and Arthur prepared a warm bed for Clara. But he noticed she wouldn't get into bed. She stood by the edge of the bed, eyes wide open, staring at the blank wall. She was waiting for a bell to signal the end of the day, waiting for permission to end the day, as at St. Jude's. Arthur realized how deeply the reprogramming had ingrained itself in Clara's subconscious. She no longer knew how to permit herself to rest. He did not give an order. He silently pulled his own mattress onto the floor, lay there and closed his eyes. He turned sleeping into a natural, unauthorized action. He wanted to show Clara that rest was a right, not a reward. The second day passed in tense silence. Arthur found Clara hiding in a dark corner of the room. She had found a piece of charcoal. She was drawing distorted schedule charts on the wall. 7 o'clock, wake up. 7:30, breakfast. 8 o'clock, study. She was trying to create a new prison for herself because freedom was too terrifying. "Clara, what are you doing?" I am reestablishing order. Everything is too chaotic. I need a plan." Arthur stepped forward, gently taking the charcoal from his daughter's hand. "Our plan today is to have no plan at all." He threw open all the windows. The sea wind rushed in, scattering the notes Clara had tried to arrange. The sound of waves crashing on the shore drowned out the suffocating silence in the house. Just then, Arthur's phone rang. A flood of calls from the company. Billions of dollars were waiting for his decision. Clara looked at the phone, a familiar spark in her eyes. That was the world she understood. Arthur looked at his daughter, then at the phone. He knew he had to make a choice. He took the continuously ringing phone and walked straight out to the porch. He tossed it into a bucket of cold water used for soaking fish. The phone sank to the bottom, the screen flashing one last time before going dark. He had completely severed contact with the world of numbers. He forced both of them to face this raw reality. Clara watched the phone sink, then looked at her father. Her face was no longer composed. It was chaos. She didn't speak. But suddenly she turned and bolted out of the house. She ran toward the beach where the large waves were roaring. She seemed to be looking for a place with more order, a power greater than the chaos her father had just created. Arthur was alarmed. He hadn't thought his action would drive his child to this. He rushed after her, his footsteps sinking deep into the wet sand. "Clara, stop!" But Clara didn't listen. She kept running until the edge of the seawater licked her small feet. She stood there facing the vast ocean, small and trembling. Arthur caught up, but he didn't dare to get closer. He was afraid that a small movement of his would send her into the sea. "Clara!" He called, his voice hoarse from the sea wind. "Come here to Daddy." Clara didn't turn around. She only shouted back, her voice almost lost to the sound of the waves. "I don't know what to do anymore. There are no rules, no schedule. I am a variable error." Arthur felt his heart constrict. He had tried to break down his daughter's prison, but he hadn't realized that she had come to see those bars as home. He walked forward slowly. He took off his jacket and draped it over Clara's trembling shoulders. "You are not a variable error, Clara. You are my daughter." He stood there next to his daughter, facing the infinity of the sea together. He knew that this process of detox from obedience would be more painful than he had imagined, but he wouldn't back down. He would be here until his daughter learned to accept the chaos of life and of herself. Arthur ran on the sand. His expensive leather shoes sank deep into the wet mud. He saw Clara in the distance. She hadn't rushed into the sea. She was kneeling down. Her small hands were frantically raking through the piles of sand. Clara wasn't playing. She was working. Arthur stopped a few steps away from his daughter. He quietly observed. Clara was trying to build a sand castle, but it didn't look like a child's castle. It had unnaturally straight walls. The angles were oddly square. She used a small piece of wood to flatten the sand surface. She measured with her eyes. She was trying to rebuild order right in the middle of the ocean's chaos. "I have to get it right," Clara muttered. "If it doesn't stand firm, I will be undervalued." Arthur moved closer. "What are you building, Clara?" "I am building a defense system. Ms. Thorne said the world is always trying to destroy us. We have to be tough enough." She didn't look at her father. Her fingers were red and swollen from scraping the dry sand, but she didn't stop. Arthur saw the despair in her every movement. Clara found no joy in building. She was only trying to escape her fear by creating something perfect. The tide began to rise. Small waves gradually licked the base of the castle. Clara frantically piled on more sand. She used her whole body to shield it from the wind, but the ocean didn't care about her effort. A large wave suddenly crashed in. It carried the power of the sea, knocking down the entire eastern wall. Clara screamed. It was a heart-wrenching sound. It wasn't the scream of losing a toy. It was the shriek of someone who had just seen their whole world collapse. "No, I'm sorry, Ms. Thorne." Clara collapsed into the water. She tried to scoop up the melting piles of sand with her bare hands. "I made a mistake. My efficiency is too low. I let a variable error occur. I apologize." Arthur felt a sharp pain in his heart. She wasn't calling for her father. She wasn't crying over wasted effort. She was apologizing to a man who wasn't there. She was begging for forgiveness for a mistake that wasn't her fault. Arthur didn't step in to help her rebuild. He sat down right next to the salty pool. He used his large hand to deliver a firm blow to the remaining part of the sandcastle. Clara froze. She looked at the crumbling sand under her father's hand. Her amber eyes were filled with shock. "Father, what are you doing? It's all ruined." Arthur didn't answer with an explanation. He laughed, a loud, hearty, and free laugh. He scooped up a handful of wet sand and threw it straight onto Clara's shoulder. "I like it ruined," Arthur said. "I like it falling apart like this." Clara looked at the sand on her shoulder. Then she looked at her father's smile. Something inside her was shaken. Thorne's rigid logic didn't teach her how to react to this. Why could a failure bring a smile? Arthur continued to throw sand. He made himself as messy as a child. "Look, Clara, It's ruined and the world is still not ending. I'm still here. You're still here. No one has incurred a loss. Clara's shell of rationality began to crack. She looked at the pile of broken sand, looking at her millionaire father covered in mud. And then she started to cry. It wasn't a polite sniffle. It was an emotional storm. Clara wailed, sobbing uncontrollably. She buried her head in her father's shoulder. Hot tears soaked Arthur's shirt. I miss Mother so much, Father," Clara screamed amidst the sound of the waves. For the first time in 6 months, she dared to speak the truth. She no longer cared about garbage memories or variable errors. She was just an 8-year-old child devastated by missing her mother. She said I had to forget Mother. She said Mother was a system error. But I can't forget. I see Mother in these circles. I see Mother every time I close my eyes. Arthur held her tight. Clara struggled. She used her small hands to repeatedly punch his chest. She was venting all the suppressed feelings, the repression and the anger towards the father who had neglected her. Arthur didn't let go. He let the seawater and tears mingle. "I'm sorry, Clara. I was wrong. I was the one who messed everything up," Arthur whispered into her ear. "I love you when you're a mess. I love you even when you ruin every castle in the world. You don't have to be perfect for me to love you. Your mistakes are the most wonderful things I've ever seen." The crying spell lasted for a long time. Clara cried until her voice was hoarse, until the strength in her body was depleted. She gradually succumbed to sleep in Arthur's arms. The tension that had lasted for months vanished, leaving an exhaustion that was utterly relieving. Arthur picked her up. Clara felt feather-light in his arms. He walked along the beach back to the wooden cabin. The sea wind blew her hair against his face. For the first time, Arthur felt truly like a father. He no longer thought about profits or stocks. He only thought about how to keep those small hands from ever drawing those soulless circles again. He put Clara on the bed. He gently took off her sand-filled shoes. He tucked her in carefully. This time, Clara didn't stand by the edge of the bed waiting for a command. She fell asleep instantly. Her breathing was even. Her hands were relaxed, no longer clenched. A natural sleep. Arthur sat by her side for a long time. He looked at Clara's peaceful face under the faint moonlight. Then he stood up. The tenderness in his eyes disappeared. It was replaced by a chilling intensity. He walked to the living room. He retrieved his backup laptop from his bag. He plugged in the USB drive containing all the recordings from St. Jude's. Arthur Sterling opened the final audio file. Evelyn Thorne's voice filled the dark living room. "You must be a showcase, Clara. When your father looks at you, he should only see the perfection he craves." Arthur smiled, the smile of a man preparing to execute the most brutal takeover. "You were wrong, Evelyn," Arthur said softly. "You underestimated the price a father is willing to pay to save his child." His finger rested on the enter key. Arthur didn't need the police. He didn't need the court right now. He knew how to destroy a system from the inside. He began compiling a list of St. Jude's largest investors, his own friends, his business partners. The silent war began with a button press. Arthur knew that tomorrow Evelyn Thorne's world would no longer be 100% stable, as she had always hoped. The laptop cast a cold blue light on Arthur's face. He was no longer the gentle father on the beach. He was a shark that had scented blood. And he wouldn't stop until he had leveled that school to the ground. Behind the door, Clara stirred slightly in her sleep. She had no idea that her father had just declared war on an entire empire. Arthur's finger pressed firmly down on the enter key. In the darkness of the wooden cabin, the light from the computer screen reflected the resolve on his face. A torrent of anonymous emails containing shocking audio snippets began to fly out. He had distorted Clara's voice to protect her, but Evelyn Thorne's cold voice remained crystal clear. Those files landed directly in the inboxes of board members, the biggest donors, and the city's top investigative reporters. Arthur understood that attacking morality often takes time, but attacking the cash flow yields immediate results. He picked up his phone, making a few brief calls to close financial partners. "I want to pull all capital from funds linked to the education group behind St. Jude's," Arthur said, "and make sure other investors know why." He didn't stop there. A calculated rumor was leaked through financial news channel St. Jude's was secretly collecting psychological data from the children of the financial elite to sell to behavioral advertising corporations. To those powerful parents, having their children turned into commodities was an unforgivable insult. The domino effect happened faster than Arthur anticipated. The next morning, while he was still sitting by the backup laptop, the news broke. Parents who considered their children the face of the family felt deeply betrayed. They were not only furious that their children had been reprogrammed, but also that their family's privacy had been compromised. A wave of student withdrawals swept through the school that very morning. Luxury cars lined up at the school gate, not to drop off children, but to collect belongings. The stock of the St. Jude's parent company plummeted. Major donors sequentially announced cutting all ties to protect their personal reputations. Arthur opened a live stream link on his screen. Evelyn Thorne was surrounded right in the school's main lobby. She had been summoned to explain herself to the board and the media. Evelyn still wore her impeccably pressed suit, still trying to maintain her customary haughty composure. But as the crowd of reporters closed in and pointed microphones at her like spears, her perfect facade began to crack. "Ms. Thorne, how do you explain teaching children that their parents are investors who need to be repaid with obedience?" a reporter shouted. "It is an optimization method." Evelyn hesitated, her eyes darting, searching for an escape. "Do you call inciting young children to discard photos of their loved ones optimization?" The crowd's anger flustered Evelyn. Her face was flushed, and the hair that was neatly tied in a bun now began to fall loose. The fake perfection was exposed, revealing a woman trembling with fear and humiliation. Arthur looked at the screen and understood that this woman's career was completely over. Amidst the media storm, a new email notification popped up in Arthur's anonymous inbox. It was from a parent whose child was in Clara's class. "I don't know who you are, but thank you. My son dared to cry in front of me for the first time tonight. You saved my entire family from that factory." Arthur read it and then hit the permanent delete button. He didn't need recognition or thanks. His goal was never to be a hero. He only needed absolute safety for his daughter and to ensure that no factory like that would exist to harm her again. Just 1 week later, the official news announced St. Jude's had declared bankruptcy. The government revoked the school's operating license for a deeper investigation into psychological abuse. Evelyn Thorne disappeared from the education sector, her name becoming a black mark no organization dared to touch. Arthur closed the laptop. The dry sound of the lid shutting was like the final gavel of a court session. His mission of retribution was complete. The empire of silence had utterly collapsed. He heard a soft sound from behind. Arthur turned around. Clara was standing in the doorway of the living room. She was no longer wearing the pristine uniform of St. Jude's, but an old t-shirt with a small stain from breakfast. In her hand, she held a box of crayons and a blank sheet of paper. Clara's eyes had life in them. They were no longer a still lake, but had small ripples of curiosity and hope. "Father," Clara called, her voice having regained the cadence of a child. "Yes, sweetie." "Can we go home, Father? I don't like our old house anymore, but I want to go back to repaint my room. I want it to have many colors, not just gray." Arthur walked over, knelt down, and took his daughter's hand. This time, Clara didn't pull away. She squeezed his hand tightly. "Of course. We will go back and you can draw on any wall you like." Arthur stood up, looked toward the sea one last time, and led his daughter to the car. He knew the old penthouse would be sold soon. They needed a new beginning, a place truly called home. But as they stepped out the door, Clara abruptly stopped. She looked down at the blank paper she was holding, then at the box of crayons. "Father, if I make a mistake drawing, will you scold me?" Arthur smiled, stroking her head. "I will draw something else with you from that mistake. A mistake is just a way to start a new drawing." Clara nodded, smiling naturally for the first time. But as they both stepped into the yard, a strange car pulled up to the cabin gate. A man got out holding a thick file with the state education department's emblem. Arthur narrowed his eyes, tightly holding Clara's shoulder. The legal battle seemed to be just beginning in a way he hadn't anticipated. The man holding the file at the cabin gate that day was not a new enemy. He had come to confirm that St. Jude's had been completely erased from the education system. Arthur Sterling signed the final papers, closing a dark chapter. He didn't claim monetary compensation. To him, the time spent with his daughter was the most precious profit. Father and daughter returned to the city on a weekend. Arthur did not go back to the penthouse atop the tower. He sold it to a foreign corporation. He also resigned as CEO of the investment fund. Arthur only kept a remote advisory role. He no longer wanted to manage numbers. He wanted to manage his life more manually. They moved to a garden villa in the suburbs. The house had lots of greenery and natural light. No more reinforced glass separating them from the world. No more cold automated curtain systems. Here, birds sang on the branches right outside the windows, and dried leaves covered the yard. Arthur learned to sweep the leaves himself, a messy but authentic chore. Monday morning, the day Clara started at her new school. It was a regular public school in the neighborhood. Arthur woke up early. He didn't call the driver. He stood in the sun-drenched kitchen holding a spatula. Clara sat at the warm oak dining table. She was wearing a light pink t-shirt and jeans. Her hair was no longer tied up tightly like an adult's, but flowed naturally. Arthur was frying eggs on a pan. The smell of butter and cooking eggs filled the room. He wasn't good at this. His egg was charred at the edges, and the yolk wasn't centered. "Breakfast is almost ready, sweetie," Arthur said. He glanced at Clara. She was busy drawing on a white sheet of paper. Arthur smiled until he saw what was on the page. Clara's hand held a black crayon. She drew a large, dark, bold circle in the middle of the paper. Clang! The spatula slipped from Arthur's hand, hitting the tiled floor. His heart skipped a beat. Memories of the days Clara sat motionless, drawing those invisible circles on her palm, rushed back like a nightmare. He saw his daughter's soulless eyes again and Ms. Thorne's cold voice. Arthur felt cold sweat soaking his shirt. He feared that all the healing efforts on the beach were only temporary. He feared that the ghost of St. Jude's still deeply haunted his child's mind. Hearing the sound, Clara looked up. She saw her father's worried face and trembling hands. But this time, Clara was not afraid. She did not flinch or apologize for disrupting the atmosphere. Clara smiled, a genuine, warm smile. She picked up a yellow crayon, beginning to fill the black circle with vigorous strokes. Then she drew rays of light spreading out around it. "Father, are you okay?" Clara asked. I was just a little startled." "What are you drawing?" Clara held up the paper. The black circle had disappeared under a layer of bright yellow. "It's not a control circle, Father. It's the sun. It's a beautiful sunny day today." Arthur let out a long sigh of relief. 1,000-pound rock had been lifted from his chest. His eyes stung. He realized he had been overly sensitive. He realized Clara was genuinely fighting to turn those dark memories into something brighter. "Yes, it is very sunny, and my egg is burned," Arthur said, his voice slightly hoarse. "It's okay, Father. I like the crispy edges. It's crunchy." Father and daughter ate that simple breakfast with enjoyment. There was no thick silence. There was the sound of birds chirping, spoons clinking against plates, and Clara talking about wanting to join the drawing club. Arthur listened to every word. He didn't calculate efficiency. He didn't think about the distant future. He only lived for the moment. After breakfast, Arthur drove Clara to school. The SUV drove through tree-lined streets. Arthur looked in the rearview mirror. Clara was looking out the window quietly, humming an unnamed tune. She no longer sat ramrod straight like a tin soldier. They stopped in front of the new school gate. The schoolyard was a wonderful chaos. Shouting, laughing, and running footsteps of hundreds of children echoed everywhere. Children in clothes of all colors running freely. No neat rows, no deadly silence. Arthur pulled the car to the curb. He turned to look at his daughter. "Ready?" "I'm ready, Father." Clara opened the car door and stepped out. Just then, a boy with a green backpack was chasing his friend. He didn't stop in time and bumped hard into Clara's shoulder. Thump. Clara's backpack fell to the ground. The books inside were slightly jostled. Arthur held his breath, clutching the steering wheel. He was about to open the door to intervene. He was afraid Clara would fall into a state of panic or start apologizing for her low efficiency again. But Clara didn't do that. She didn't panic. She didn't apologize either. Clara bent down, picking up her backpack herself. She lightly brushed off the dust on the fabric. Then, instead of standing still waiting for a command, Clara looked up at the embarrassed boy. "Hey, you're a fast runner," Clara said loudly. The boy grinned broadly. "Sorry about that, want a race?" She slung the backpack onto her shoulder, quickly waved goodbye to Arthur, and ran after the boy into the crowd. Arthur sat in the car watching his daughter's small figure until she disappeared behind the classroom door. He breathed a sigh of relief, the most complete relief he had ever felt in his life. He realized that his mistake before was trying to create a perfect world for her. But perfection was a kind of prison. The chaos out there, the streaks of burnt egg, the dust on the backpack, and the uncontrolled laughter were life itself. Arthur Sterling started the car. He didn't go back to the office. He decided he would go buy a few more boxes of crayons and some seeds to plant in the garden with Clara in the afternoon. He drove away, leaving behind the cold rules and dry spreadsheets. He knew the machine system in his old self was completely broken beyond repair. But amidst those fragments, a true father had been born. In the sky, the sun, exactly like Clara's drawing, was shining brightly. Today was a beautiful day, a day that required no optimization schedule whatsoever. Arthur smiled a smile without error. The story of a millionaire and a child had ended, but Arthur and Clara's lives were just truly beginning. A life full of wonderful mistakes and emotions that never needed to be liquidated. Note: the above story is entirely fictional. Names, locations, and details have been constructed for the purpose of illustrating an educational and artistic message. Any resemblance to real persons or events is purely coincidental.